morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a privilege to be here. As I was, as we were chanting the not the Shoshin, the Junirai. I recall back to the times when I was a Dharma school student back in Mountain View, California, and that was half a century ago. Hard to believe, 50 years ago, and it's amazing, almost a sense of miracle that here I am, 50 years later, still alive, still active, still able to walk, and be here in Canada, of all places, and to be chanting the same sutra together, and so it is a miracle. I especially in my situation, being in Tokyo, where, as you know, over 3.5 years ago, there was that big earthquake and tsunami. At that time, I thought I had to leave Japan and go back to California because we weren't sure if it would be radioactive free to continue our lifestyle in the Kanto area, and so since then, even more, I feel a sense that an ordinary existence is a miracle in itself. Just to be where you are, to be a miracle. Is a miracle. The last line of Junirai, every stanza, the verse you have, Kogai Chodai Midason. And that especially is meaningful. It's memory-provoking because there was a friend of mine who, when we were in college days, he talked about how he liked to go to church because he would read that last line, and Kogai Chodai Midason, except he didn't hear it that way. He said in Japanese, his sansei, so he didn't know Japanese, but he could understand that much. He thought he read, Chodai, chodai, kudasai. and the reason for that is that, you go to church and after service and you repeat that and you get candy. And that's how it was, the people, and it was a community. And children were there, and that is an image that I think we need to keep in mind as we talk about this issue of where we go from here, that ultimately Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and Sangha is a community rooted and based on the Dharma. So with that, what I'd like to do is, we have 4 hours, and I certainly would not want to talk for 4 hours straight, or all 4 hours. I think I see it more as a workshop. In fact, I don't feel that I'm more qualified than many of the people here, because you're right in the midst of of dealing with this situation. Whereas I'm in a different context. To just kind of introduce what I'm doing recently these days is that I moved to Japan 16 years ago, and now an academic at a place called Musashino University. Is a Jōdo Shinshu based university, and I teach a number of classes, but my main course is a Buddhist course called in Japanese Kyosei Genri. Kyosei is living together or interdependence. So the theory of interdependence, and I teach about 1,000 students a year, and the class is mandatory, compulsory, and they really don't want to be there, and in fact, many of them have a very negative view of Buddhism, as Buddhism is associated with funerals, and especially with the Om Shinrikyo terrorist attack in I think it was 1995 or so, that religion has a kind of a bad rap. And so we have to fight getting over the image of Buddhism and also religion. And so it's challenging for me. But basically I talk about basic concepts of Buddhism and try to see how it applies to their lives. And in many respects, many of them find that Buddhism is more meaningful than they thought. And so it's a very meaningful thing for me. I'm also involved in two academic associations. One is the one that Bishop mentioned, the IASBS, International Association of Shin Buddhist Studies, which has members throughout the world, about 300 members in Japan, Hawaii, North America, South America, Oceania, East Asia and Oceania, and Europe. So it's the only academic association for the Shin Buddhist group that's international. So if any of you is not a member, please consider joining and to further the academic dimension of our Shin effort in the world. I'm also been involved in the promotion of a new academic association we started called Buddhist Psychology Association, Japanese Association for the Study of Buddhism and Psychology, which I'm serving as a president. And because we had an eminent scholar who was well known in the psychology side, and he got us started. And I'm basically involved because I'm involved in the administration of it. And without any effort, we got in 5 years we went from 3 people to 200. And so I expect this association to grow much more in Japan because more people are realizing that Buddhism needs to be talked about from a different perspective. And psychology is taking hold in Japan much more than before. Although in America, in North America, psychological approach to Buddhism is much more prominent and has been an important part of the Buddhist movement. Anyway, okay, so let's look at. I'm glad I have something to write on. We may not be able to cover all of it, but maybe, as I do with my students, we can all you can participate and read this passage together, so you know basically what the aim of my talks are. So the traditional membership, okay, from there, okay. Ichi, ni, san. Oh, we're in Canada, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. The traditional membership base for Jōdo Shinshu is rapidly dwindling. This may be a crisis for some, but this can be an opportunity to share the teachings to a wider audience than ever before. Skip that line, and then the talk seeks to contextualize Jōdo Shinshu Buddhism in an increasingly secularized society as a foundation on which to promote its teachings and practices to a wider range of seekers. The task will not be easy, but it is essential if the Shinshu temples are to survive and thrive. I believe they can and will. Okay. I believe they can be overcome, and we will be able to thrive and continue. At least that is my hope. And I know it's not easy, and all of you realize what that means. And so, first of all, when we talk about promotion of Buddhism, I think there's the hardware and software dimension, or the organizational and the teachings part. And both are very important, vital. And so I want to begin by talking about the organizational or the hardware, so-called hardware. And that is something that all of you are heavily involved in, and you should have a lot to say about this. And in the past number of times that I've been giving some talks with BCA, I have used the image of a big tent. And so how our temple should be a big tent. Right now, maybe, I'm a poor Jew. I don't know what a tent looks like. Okay. So, at this point in time, many of the Shin temples is a tent, where various people can come. But the center pole that holds up the tent is cultural, ethnic. This one. And so, if that is the case, then needless to say, not too many people, other people who are outside of this particular cultural ethnic group will not be able to feel welcome. So instead, I propose a much bigger tent with the pole, the center pole, being the, needless to say, Dharma. So it's just the present situation, cultural, ethnic at the center. That's holding up the tent, but the tent is consequently small. But if you have, and the vision is to have a strong center pole that is Dharma, or the teachings, which is universal. This is not universal. It's specific and bounded. And with that, you have more people, all different groups of people coming under this huge tent. And it's supported by the Dharma. So that's the image. And so the shift, the center pole needs to shift to a much more universal pole, which is Buddhism. And there's another, I was in Central Valley last week to another symposium. Actually, we had a reunion of YBA, and there we met friends whom I've known for 50 years, and we were looking at some of the old pictures, and it's amazing how we have changed. All of us, I'm not a grandfather yet, but many of our the YBA buddies are grandfathers, and the girls are grandmas. It's really hard. And we're looking at some pictures, and boy, I had a lot of hair. I'm so envious now, But this is change, right? Impermanence. We all talk about impermanence, but no, not me, But you look at old pictures and you see the change. Well, anyway, so now I forgot what the point I was trying to make. Yeah. And I spoke to 2 ministers who are in the Central Valley. They used to have 7 or 8 in each temple, but they are down to only 2 ministers at the Fresno Between Temple. And the 2 of them serve the other temples. It's a very difficult situation, needless to say. And it's the direction we're headed unless we make this kind of shift. And Reverend Alan Sakamoto is one of the 2. And he's the younger of the 2, so he has to run around all over the district. And we had a very nice conversation. And he said that, and I mentioned, we were talking about this kind of thing. He said, he says, I use a, what is this? Wheel of Dharma, or a spokes, And he says, he thinks of this as the center is where the Dharma is. Dharma here, the center, and this symbolism can represent what I'm talking about in a different perspective. He says we need to have these spokes represent means or ways that people come into the temple, or how the people connect with the temple. And so, as you know, the BB Buddhists, are you familiar with the BB Buddhists? Okay. Well, okay. First is there are people who come to the temple for reasons other than the Dharma. Or let's just say they're attracted to the temple and Buddhism because of certainly because to some extent to Dharma, but other things. And one is, and so there are all kinds of, in a way, all kinds of Buddhists. And so one is most bizarre Buddhists. Bizarre Buddhists. And, I've talked about this in the past, but I found more. Another one is bored Buddhists. Bored Buddhists, we have some here. No. But this is not to say that that's all they care about, but that's their way of connecting. And so for some people, they're much more interested in the board, being a board member, running the organization, than attending the temple, the services. And so, what else do we have? I was going to do barbecue Buddhists, but okay. No, I had written some down because I began to forget them. Oh yeah. Those who like to study Buddhism and read books, book Buddhists. Okay, and not so much here, but basketball Buddhists. Especially in California, there are people who come because of bingo. And one, this is I have to make it B, but I would think this is not quite appropriate, but burial, death ritual. This is, so people, I understand on Saturday there will be a lot of people coming to the Shotsuki Hoyo, and I asked Diane back there, and then what was his Roy, yeah, and who took me to Niagara Falls yesterday. It was a wonderful trip, first time for me, and they were telling me that on Saturday about 200 people will be coming. I was astonished.
Sunday.
Oh, Sunday, yes. And 200 people coming, whereas on Sundays you have far less. And so clearly there are people who are attracted to the temple, or they see a meaning of temple being a burial death ritual place. Okay. Well, I prefer to say funerary rites, but since we have to have B, so I have burial. Okay. What else? Well, you can think of one. The last one would be, this is bored Buddhist, but this one is bored Buddhist. This is a new one I got picked up in Fresno because someone added to it. It's wonderful. Jōdo Shinshu is not us ministers or speakers talking down, but it's more of a communal, horizontal approach. And when we have we get views from the audience. And one of the ideas that I got is someone said, "Oh, we have bored Buddhists, so there are bored Buddhists." Bored? I'm not getting much reaction. You're probably wondering what does it mean by. Probably someone who's not very enthused with what's going on, or someone who's. It could be someone who's wants to study more Buddhism, but not much is going on, or not enough is going on, and so it could include a whole. Well, anyway, so the BB Buddhists and all of these people should fit here. Now, one thing I do want to emphasize is that even though in the big tent imagery, the Dharma is at its core, but it doesn't mean that the cultural dimension should be thrown out. that I think the cultural dimension can be an attraction. So it need not be thrown out, but kept right within the big tent. Now I thought after Reverend Sakamoto mentioned this, so you see this part here, it's the wheel of Dharma, the core is the Dharma, and all these spokes are like funnels. They funnel in people, and eventually it's the function of the ministers and the lay leaders to encourage people to come to the center and to come and touch the heart of Buddhism. So then, in my as I thought about this can be kind of be, like this, and if this can be viewed from the top, and so there are spokes coming out this way as well, and not only do people come in, but it's another imagery to see that the Dharma is at the core, but you have various people of different interests and inclination who can come get a chance to ultimately come in touch with Dharma. So the main message here is the shift from this pole to this pole. And by doing so, you have many more people who can come into it. Okay, so and the other things here, in an institutional welcome spirit, various ways of affiliation. I mean, these all of you know, and I know that many temples have instituted welcome when new people come away, to invite people and make them feel welcome, and that is important. And the key is to continue to do that in a more systematic way, consistently as well. The one thing I wanted to point out is that with the change in the religious makeup and where people are busier, people live far away, these are all qualities of much more secularized society. I mentioned one statistics, and Jeff Wilson is one of the experts on American Buddhism, but one of the things, big change in American, at least American Buddhism, and it applies to Canada as well, is that the number of unaffiliated has grown. 40 years ago maybe it was 1%. In 2007 it was 19% unaffiliated. Those who have interest but they don't go to church anymore, they're not affiliated. 19%. Okay, so 1% to 19% in less than 40 years. And then the latest statistics show that it's even higher, and especially among young people. What percentage of the young people are unaffiliated? 1/3, 33% of this is I think this was U.S., but Canada is no different. And so 1/3 of young people are no longer affiliated, and that's another reason why some of the grandchildren and your kids are not going to Buddhist temples. So
isn't that statistic true of other religions as well?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, yes. This is not just Buddhism.
That's right.
Yeah. So now in this context, then, how to get members is of concern. But if you expect everyone to become a member and do everything as a member, participate in one committee or another and come out on Saturday and do the whole shebang, then they will be less inclined and will give them more reasons why not to come participate in a religious institution. So I think one way that, one thing to be of concern is to think of a different form of membership. I call it one-dimensional membership. If they're interested in meditation, just come in and they can become a member or some kind of affiliated member just by engaged in one thing. But they should contribute some, monetarily or, but that's up to you. But give them a sense that they belong to the community, but they're not as obligated. And this is something, it's my thought, but all of you need to look at the reality of the religious scene in North America and how to deal with this. And obviously, people are just busier, they live far away, and you have a lot more competition with the video games and all of this, And so that's one thing to definitely think about. The internet is obviously important, and I won't go into that. And there are so many ways of developing that to enticing or encouraging people to be part of your community. And obviously the personal dimension, which may not really be a hardware, but you are all messengers, needless to say, and ministers, of course. By the way, I feel kind of awkward being up here because I think that ministers know all of this and are involved, and I also want to personally express my sense of respect that I have for the ministers who are in the temples and working with the members, because without you, we wouldn't have Buddhism. We wouldn't have Buddhism as a religion. And so, because I'm working at an institution, academics, I get invited to this, and I'm talking as if I know a lot more, but I certainly don't. And it's important, especially for the lay people, lay leaders, to. I'm sure you realize that, but the ministers go through a lot, and I think they have to be acknowledged for that, as always. And I was a minister for 3 years, and I know. Yeah. I remember first year, they were going to check my work on the salary scale, and I worked really hard. And I think the first year I brought in 10 families and got the Dharma school going. The taiko started and all of this, and then they had a meeting. They said, "Okay, Sensei, you can leave, from the board meeting, so they can talk about my salary." And when I came back, they said it was a big fight whether or not to increase my salary 5%. Because well, in my estimation, it wasn't much. I was expecting I went there. I took a big cut from. Well, not so big. IBS didn't pay very much either. But anyway, it's just money is not the issues. Ultimately, it's how much the board members respected what you're doing, and those who saw what I was doing did fight for me. But there are many others on the board who didn't see that, and they grudgingly gave me a 5% raise. When he started out from kind of relatively low scale. But my point is not to complain about my pay, but to point out how that some board members don't appreciate what the ministers are doing. Of course, some ministers may not be producing as much as they should, but well, in that case, tell them, and help them, and work together. So. Then my point here is that personal part is very important. You as messengers and the living example of a Buddhist is how you lead your life and what kind of enthusiasm you bring to others. That goes a whole lot more than a fine-tuning of the Dharma. Other power, self-power, one's calling, many calling, they don't really matter to the ordinary people. Ordinary people, all they care is, oh, that minister, I like him. I like her. He's a nice person. She's a nice person. He listens to us. These, and they seem to, they appear to me to be living the Dharma. And that is a testimony that will go, that they can relate to. It's a testimony by which they will decide whether they will be part of this community. And so it's the obvious. So all of us we always need to work on the personal dimension. And I myself too, I learn from the students all the time. And in fact, some of what I'm going to say is reflected based on what they have told me. They also help me to tell better jokes. In Japan, I've become known more as a person, teacher who shares humor more than the Dharma. Oh, that rhymes. Humor than Dharma. No, maybe it doesn't. No. All right. But what I'm so happy about is that at the end of class, the classes are 1.5 hours in Japan. It's kind of long, you know. So by the time you get to 1 hour and 20 minutes, they're kind of tired, you know. Even though my talks are inspirational. Although, you know, students in Japan are not as motivated as some of you may know. Or they're just kind of, you know, some of them don't even know how much money they're paying, tuition. One time I asked, ours is $10,000 a year, it's a private school. And then says, how much do you think your parents are paying? I said, gee, and he thinks about it, goes, 100,000? 100,000 a year. You know, they're totally out of the context, right? That's how much this person doesn't know. You know what the so anyway, so sometimes they go to sleep, and in class, I think in North America, students don't go to sleep, do they? I mean, maybe things have changed. Not in your class. Yeah, he's an inspirational speaker. But even you, you know, so there are some students because we have students who work all day, all night, in part-time jobs, and they come and they haven't slept. But I give out yellow cards now. You know, like in soccer. You take a yellow card, put it on their desk, and they listen better the next time they get docked for that kind of behavior. Anyway, let's. I think I got away from what I wanted to say. Basically, I've made my point in the first segment, and this is more the institutional part of it. And there's a whole lot that can be said about this. So I wanted to kind of open up for discussion. So I think I spoke for about half an hour, and let's just kind of talk about this, and any thoughts you have, and anything that you can teach me, I would appreciate it. So comments, questions?
So that Dharma wheel, I agree that there are different people who associate with Buddhism for different reasons.
Uh-huh.
But don't you think that the same applies to the Dharma itself, that different individuals have different interests and take something different away from the Dharma?
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging that, like how do you propagate the Dharma so it resonates with as many people as possible?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a Japanese Dharma, there's the Nisei Dharma, there's a Sansei Dharma,
Mm-hmm.
there's a Anglophone Dharma. There's many audiences with diverse interests. So how do you bring this all together?
Well, I mean, that is you know, you're talking more of how some people come in to the Dharma and how they take that out. And I think it's both ways, you know, different types come in from different spokes, you know, on different spokes, and if they come in touch with the Dharma and transform by it, then they will, you know, go out in their own way. I mean, we all understand Dharma in our own way and express them in our own way. And obviously people who are not traditional members have a different approach to it, but they themselves can take this route and share the Dharma. And then hopefully they will be able to attract people of similar, like-minded people and bring them in and have them be touched by the Dharma and then go up. So I think this scheme doesn't negate different ways of interpreting and understanding the Dharma. Yeah.
As I see it,
Yes.
there are wheels at the end of each of those spokes.
Wheels at the end of,
That's right.
oh, over here?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Through their own interest, they now use the Dharma as the spoke.
Mm-hmm.
Through their particular interest that
Yeah.
got them into it.
Okay, yeah.
And then here again, that energy spreads out to other people, because then you have your own wheel which
Yes.
spins out.
Mhm.
So it's like an energy that comes from the main.
Yeah, it's an ever-growing spoke wheel, and as you know, this Dharma chakra is called the Dharma wheel is one that spreads endlessly. Initially, this in India, this was a sign of an emperor whose territory extends as much as the wheel of his chariot, would roll, and wherever his chariot or wheel rolled, that's his territory, and Chakravartin, one who turns the wheel, and Buddhism took that as a metaphor for how Buddhism, this time not military, but Dharma, hopefully the Dharma rolled and spread to as wide a place as possible. And that is, so in a way it's a symbol of propagation. So Buddha is not just a static symbol, but this is dynamic. It's a dynamically moving. And Buddhism is often seen as kind of a static, kind of inward religion, but it is essentially, it was, and it has been a very forward-looking and dynamic and propagational religion. And well, that's how it spread to Southeast Asia and up north in East Asia. And now it's going beyond Asia to Western world. And I talked about in Canada, I mentioned later here, in Canada the number of Buddhists is I think, well, Jeff would know more, but according to Jessica Main, who came to Japan to participate in the conference that I held, she says 1.1% of Canadians are Buddhists. So we're looking at close to 380,000 Buddhists. That's 2001, so I believe it's larger, and so it's probably more than 1.1. Do you have the latest figures?
They've changed the way they collect the census data, so
Yeah.
Unfortunately it's hard now for us to make the comparative things, but it's clear that it is definitely continuing an upward trend, absolutely.
And the U.S. is, we have probably 3.5 million Buddhists. And if you include the nightstand Buddhists, nightstand Buddhists, do you know nightstand Buddhists? Those people who don't commit to be Buddhists, but are very interested in Buddhism. They practice Buddhism. They read a lot. So they read books in the privacy of their home, especially in their bedroom, before they go to bed. They read the book and they put it on the nightstand, like that. They go to sleep. Next morning they get up, and then try to remember how to meditate, what they read the night before, and they meditate for 40 minutes. And so that's why they're called nightstand Buddhists. It was coined by Professor Thomas Tweed, who is another specialist on American religion, especially Asian religions. So if you include the nightstand Buddhists, we're looking at probably 5 million so-called Buddhist population. And the impact is much wider than that. There are many more people who've been impacted by Buddhism regarding their spirituality and religion, and we're looking at 25 million people. And so I often say Buddhist population, in a sense of those who are Buddhists, nightstand Buddhists, and those who have been impacted by Buddhism, we're looking at over 30 million. That's 1/10 of the population, and that is a huge, much larger than, as many of you probably would attest, is that when you were growing up, the status of Buddhism was almost non-existent. So I mentioned in my book that I wrote in Japanese called America Bukkyo, that I started out by talking about my junior high school day when I was asked, "What's your religion?" And I didn't have confidence. I was even ashamed to be Buddhist because Buddhism meant Buddhists were seen as Buddhism was seen as an Asian cult, where people stared at, people belly buttons and meditate. I mean, it was that kind of an image. And so I said, in response, I said, what's your religion? I said quietly, I go to a Buddhist church in town. See, you see the subtle difference? I didn't say I'm a Buddhist, like my kids would say now. I have 3 children, they live in the States. But they, you know, if you were to ask them, they'll say, oh, I'm a Buddhist, you know, with confidence. But in my days, you know, I go to a Buddhist church in town. And then also church wasn't a conscious effort by Jōdo Shinshu temples to be more Americanized, especially in the early part of the 20th century. It was only in the 1960s with the Black Power movement and when Reverend Miyamura was a radical. Did you know he was a radical? You wouldn't believe it. Now maybe, but he was at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, third world radical. And anyway, so anyway, okay. So any other comments? Yes.
Instead of B, or maybe the emphasis could be on community, C's. So you have different communities, then you don't have to be stuck, like you could have a basketball community. And so then you could also put in an ethnic community. And so we're very strong with the ethnic community, but maybe not with the local community. So you could use maybe communities as a...
well, these are all Buddhists, but you can change it to communities.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have different communities that come into the temple.
Yeah, different communities. Yeah, okay. So, but yeah, different mini communities. Yeah, but they have to have one thing in common. That is the Dharma.
Right.
Yeah, it's under the same tent. Yeah, and I think that your point is well taken. I think, and I think I mentioned at the very start the importance of community. You know that guy who said "Chodai, chodai, kudasai." That image is one of the children coming to the temple and feeling part of it, and that sense of belonging, sense of community. And now we're moving to the software part, which is the teachings, how to talk about the teachings, how to present the teachings, and in my upper preamble of my talk, I was going to as you notice, one sentence I crossed out. That was I was going to concentrate more on how to promote particular aspects of Shin Buddhism, and I will try to do that as well. But I want to concentrate more on the background for that. A broader issue of the changes that are taking place in society, and how we need to, because of the changes, why we need to kind of retool, retweak Shin teachings within that context. So that's why I use the word contextualize. Contextualize our teachings in a changing society. And do you know what this stands for? Maybe Jeff might know, but I just learned it recently too. But it's even become a category within a survey that they do. You know, Buddhists and non-Buddhists or Christians, and this is for not religious, but spiritual. This has actually now become a category in official kind of statistics that take on issues related to religion. And this, I'm sure you've heard. You know, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. This you hear especially from young people. And as I said earlier, 1/3 of the young people are not affiliated, and partly because of this. So it's not to say that they're not interested in religion, but they don't want to deal with the politics of the temple or churches. But they're interested in spiritual, the heart of the religion. I use spiritual to mean the heart of, say, in Buddhism, for example, enlightenment, shinjin, is spiritual. And then one of the main characteristics of what it means to be spiritual are there are three things. It means it is an experience. Experience. So experience. Of the what we call the sacred. Of an individual. So it's an individual experience of the sacred. This is my definition, and I get it from experts in this field, and that's what younger people and people who belong to this category are seeking. So in other words, they're not necessarily interested in subtle doctrines of this and that about the subtleties of the doctrine, but they want to experience it. Yeah? And then this is obvious. Sacred means it's out of the extraordinary, something that is different, distinct from the everyday, but rooted in the everyday, and that can help the everyday. And then it's not so much of the group. Just by belonging to a group is not enough. They want to experience it for themselves. So individual experience of the sacred is what it means spiritual. And this is a trend that you see in advanced Asian countries as well as in the West. Perhaps in some of the areas where we are having the conflicts, Middle East, I think this kind of may not apply. There's much more collectivism and not so much individual. So individual focus. And the nightstand Buddhist has all of these dimensions. And now I want to, given that introduction, please look at Dr. Kenichi Kishimoto. He's a professor. He was a professor. He passed on early part of about 10 years ago. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have met him. And he was a professor of he was a psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry at Nagoya University. But he knew Buddhism very well. And I carried this pamphlet, which was published by BDK many years ago, about 20 years ago, or even longer, I think. And it's about Jiko Jitsugen, means like self-actualization. And he tries to weld Buddhism and psychology, and he knows Buddhism very well, and I've been very impressed. And I also like him because he has the same Japanese name as mine, Kenichi, although he writes it differently. And so, I kind of took his diagram and translated it, and it's a model that clarifies the relationship between the religious and the secular. I mean, this is his, Dr. Kishimoto's diagram, but I've been working with this kind of diagram, which I got from Professor Kakue Miyagi. Miyagi Sensei was my teacher, and he always would draw this, X, and he says this is the 0 point. This is the shinjin, the spiritual transformation, and we are aspiring on the vertical path, and he said. Well, this is the society in which we live, and so we actually live on the society level. We all have our social security number. You're on the societal level, but if you are interested in religion, you have to take this part seriously, the spiritual, the vertical part. So aim is to seek higher, and for Jōdo Shinshu Buddhists is to ultimately experience shinjin. In whatever form. And then ultimately for Buddhism, well, it's to become Buddha. What would be up here? But so this is the model that I have worked with in the past. Of course, we can talk about this a lot more, but in Jōdo Shinshu, I think we are enveloped in this circle, embraced in the circle of Amida Buddha. So actually, it's not necessary for us to attain Buddhahood in this life up here. When our physical body ends, we will be assured of Buddhahood, but which you all know. So, but anyway, so this was what I used to work in. But lo and behold, when I read this pamphlet a number of years ago, he has something that was much more similar. Basically, he calls it the objective and subjective. Now, I use the word subjectivity here. In Japanese, it's shutai, kaptai. And the objective, he elaborates more, not just the horizontal line, but he has these dimensions which are interesting. Mental on the spectrum with the physical on the other side. Mental, physical, society and nature. And so we all are part of this. And and this is the spiritual part. The higher is the ultimate is awakening or Buddhahood, and he says at the bottom the minus is hell. Okay, so that's the word jigoku. So and of course, and he too says that we must acknowledge the fact that we live on the objective level, realm, but that is not enough if you are spiritual. So one has to go on this level, climb on this level. So this is first person subjective. This is third person objective. And these words, you're familiar with WHO's discussion of suffering or dimensions of our human life, and they acknowledge the mental, the societal, and the physical. And the mental, the psychologists deal with this. Society, social science, social workers deal with societal issues. Physical, the medical doctors and medical care people deal with the physical. And the spiritual, of course, is dealt by the religious people. But the WHO didn't quite affirm the spiritual dimension as an official dimension of areas of suffering, although they acknowledged mental, societal, and physical. But they have discussed this so that they're making progress towards ultimately acknowledging spiritual suffering as a legitimate form, or at least a suffering that WHO would acknowledge. So for us, this part is essential, and if you're going to be religious or spiritual, we have to take this part seriously, not just live on the horizontal level. But my point is that, as a focus of my talk, is that I think we have to be not so dichotomizing, discriminating, saying that, oh, we are just spiritual, we are religious, and that's all we have to worry about. And Buddhism has that tendency because, Buddhism is ultimately, or it began as a religion basically for those who left the world. They left this world, So they say, greed, the three poisons are the obstacles. And obviously, they are the obstacles to enlightenment. But those of us who live on this level, we cannot get rid of the three poisons of greed, anger, and stupidity. In other words, gas. You can, GAS, this is another acronym you can learn. I teach Buddhism in Japan called Buddhism through English. And rather than three poisons, I say GAS. the aim of Buddhism is to overcome gas, get rid of gas, greed, anger, stupidity, okay? Or greed, hatred, and illusion. But anyway, so traditional Buddhism, because it is a religion for those who renounce the world, they kind of are not very much concerned about that. But all of you, because you're dealing with ordinary people, you cannot disregard this. And we know that in our head, but very often when we talk about the Dharma, we just focus on this and try ignore this part as almost inconsequential. But my point is that I think that we need to think in terms of provisional means or skillful means, or upaya. And Reverend Izumi and I, we were having a discussion about this 2 nights ago, of how to take shallow understanding of Western Buddhists, well, not, for example, about impermanence. Impermanence for traditional Buddhism meant a teaching which helped and encouraged people to become detached or non-attached. Because all things are impermanent and are not worthy of reliance, we let go, and not to become tied up in it. And that's fine for monks and nuns who live out in the mountains. They don't have to worry about jobs and families. But for us who have to live on this realm, we cannot become detached completely. Otherwise, you won't have a job. You won't get your pension. So I think that, especially for Jōdo Shinshu, I think we're in a unique position to really acknowledge that fact, that we are a religion for the lay people and the ordinary, which you often say. But even though we say that, we still operate as if, this part is really negative. Now, Dr. Kishimoto's point is, let's see. And so, number 2, the subjectivity here is a spiritual part, and I use the word subjectivity because he uses it, but also I think, this is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but next year at our conference of the International Association of Shin Buddhist Studies in Berkeley at IBS, the theme will be subjectivity. And now subjectivity is in Japanese called shutaise. Well, okay, those are. And this seems to kind of go against the teaching of non-self, egolessness. So what does it mean, subjectivity? And I think that Buddhism has that dimension of if someone understands Buddhism and is transformed by it, one develops a very strong subjectivity, a sense of knowing who you are and being able to make decisions for yourself and having the confidence to carry through with the ideals that you have. And somehow the image we get from the understanding in Japan is we're a part of a kind of collective, a group, which is fine, which is important. But sometimes we take on, in a way, that kind of a traditional Japanese added ethos of being immersed in this collectivity, but losing your subjectivity. And I don't think that is the character. It's a characteristic of original Buddhism. If you look at people like Shakyamuni, he is someone who had a strong sense of identity. Shinran Shonin too. I mean, look at what he did and what he said, and they're not these meek people who just who follow the crowd. And so I think that this theme that we're going to have next year is appropriate. And the famous word by the Buddha: rely on the Dharma and rely on the self. And that part of relying on the self is important. Of course, by itself is not adequate. You have to rely on the Dharma. But then the second one is Shinran Shonin's famous word. When I ponder the compassionate vow of Amida, established through 5 kalpas of profound thought, it was meant for myself, Shinran alone. It was meant for me. And so it's very subjective. You know, it's first person. That's why this first person is important. And then in Mahayana sutras like the Nirvana Sutra, you have words like Shinga, means true self, and Taiga, the great self. So when one becomes awakened, you realize the true self, and you realize the great self. So this is not the ego self, you know. It is on a different level, obviously, but the subjectivity is important. So I think that this is appealing to people who are of this category, NRBS, you know, people. And there will be more people like this in the future. And I will think even your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will have more of those qualities than the qualities of the followers of Renyo Shonin in the 16th century Japan. Because some of the attitude, which I'm not criticizing or knocking because it was appropriate for that period, but 16th century Japan and 21st century North America are quite different contextually. And so I think we have to acknowledge that. And the teachings have to change, not its core, but how we approach it and what we emphasize. And so Dr. Kishimoto's focus on subjectivity is very apropos. And in the pencil here, which you may not be able to see, he takes an example of Myokonin, you know, the Shinshu enlightened people. And which, for some of you, if you're this first time, please learn this. Myokonins are the saints, if you want to call them, of the Shin tradition. And he says that these Myokonins tend to be not well formally educated. They don't have much formal education. They may not be wealthy, you know, in society terms. So here is Myokonins. So they're like this. This is low, this is high. So in terms of society, their educational level, their economic level are very low. And so it's not way up here, but they're over here. And then mentally, he says that, he does say that in a societal sense or a conventional sense, mentally, they may not be low, and physically same. Anyway, in societal terms, they're not well endowed, but their spiritual level is very high. So he puts it like this. So towards awakening. Okay? Then he contrasts with those who have everything going for them societally, secular-wise, wealthy. Highly positioned society, physically in good shape, mentally, etc. But they are not necessarily like this. So they would be more like here. They're high here, high here, high here. But they can be spiritually on a negative level. And so he makes this comparison, which makes sense, and I think we know a lot of people who fit this category. We found out about them in the 2009 financial crisis. I mean, they were out for themselves. You know, they took their millions and still haven't paid back. And you have people like that. And so I guess the message would be that there are a growing number of people who are more like this. And so all the more Buddhism and other true religions, more that they need to do in order to minimize people like this and send out a message that would enable more people to reach this way. even though they may not be well endowed. So I think another thing about Buddhist temples, we're often talking about retaining our community, preserving our community, but we have a role to play in a larger society, right? I mean, Buddhism has been in existence for 2,600 years, and there's something very valuable there, and something that we have to contribute, give to society as a whole. So not just turning inward, but we have a marketable software that can go out to a greater society, and by the fact that so many more people are taking interest in Buddhism, especially in advanced countries. Albert Einstein, 100 years ago, said that we have had 3 kinds of religions. No, I just said moral religion. No, religion of fear is an early form. Religion, the moral religion, and then now he says we need a cosmic religion, and cosmic religion is a religion for those who think deeper about things, and a religion that can kind of combine or to overcome the dichotomy between the spiritual and the physical. And he mentions Buddhism as a prime example. And so 100 years later, we see the example of all these growing numbers of people who resonate to what he said 100 years ago. And I believe that more people who think about matters more deeply and are not looking for simple black and white answers, they will find Buddhism appealing. And as the world becomes more educated formally, and then there will be more people who would find Buddhism appealing. And so anyway, so for all that reason that Buddhism, you have an important role to play in what you contribute to the society as a whole. Yes?
Can I play the devil's advocate,
Yeah.
saying that Islam seems to be the fastest growing religious group right now, and yet that seems to be very contrary to the thought of what you're talking about.
But where is it growing? It's growing in these traditionally Islamic countries because the birth rate is high. But in America, it's not growing as much as in Buddhism.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, that's to contradict. We don't have the most clear numbers, but a lot of the growth of Islam that we see in North America is immigration-based,
Okay.
whereas a lot of the growth that we see in Buddhism in North America is actually from the wider population coming into
Yeah.
Buddhism. So they are both growing, but there's different social reasons for it, and then somewhat supports what Dr. Tanaka is talking about here, that there is a growing interest on the part of various sectors in Buddhism.
Well, hopefully the world economy will progress, and as people become richer, I think there'll be more people who will be turning away from the fundamentalist understanding of Islam and moving towards more thoughtful ways of looking at it, at their spirituality. But well, you may be right demographically that right now the number of Islam followers are growing, but that's again because of the birth rate and growth. And these countries have a much more higher rate of growth, birth rate. But Japan too, in our BS, this group, I believe is growing even in Japan, because they're no longer, they don't understand the traditional temple setup. And in Tokyo, in large metropolitan areas, there are Sri Lankan monks and Tibetan monks who are drawing more and more followers. And there's one person by the name of Bhikkhu Sumanasara, and he's from Sri Lanka, and he's writing books, a lot of books, and young people are, especially young people, are drawn to it, and they are drawn to meditation. They like the mindfulness, and there is a mindfulness craze almost going on, and they're getting guidance by American Buddhists like John Kabat-Zinn and Joan, what's her name? Oh, it'll come to me. But she's a Zen Buddhist and who does spiritual care, death and dying and all that. And so the makeup of the religious paradigm in Japan is undergoing change. That's quite clear. Also, since the earthquake and the tsunami, more Buddhists are getting engaged, getting socially engaged. They feel that Buddhism cannot just be religion of the internal, but need to be out there helping. And there's a group that's formed, and they're doing these classes they call Rinsho Bukkyo. Rinsho means clinical Buddhism. And clinical Buddhism, it sounds kind of scientific, right? And it attracts people. And it deals with engaged Buddhism and psychology and caregiving and these kinds of applied Buddhism as well. So tradition is not static. We think that we're over here and there is static tradition in Japan, but that too is changing. Honganji is changing. Honganji organizationally, there's a subtle split that took place, and I don't understand it at all. But Tsukiji Honganji Temple in Tokyo is no longer a branch of the Honganji. Of course, it's affiliated, but anyway. So there are efforts in Japan to deal with the changes that are taking place. And okay, yes.
Like when I was in Japan, I could barely get on top of modern Japanese language.
Yeah.
So I could never go back to really ancient, writings and stuff. But a friend of mine, a fellow student, was saying that the concept of myokonin has been largely neutered as it comes into the modern day. These are all, really kind people. They wouldn't hurt a flea, and they're great, but they're also non-threatening. And at one time in the Myokonin tradition, there were social activists and people who would build a bridge and feed other people, and that slowly got winnowed out over time. Is that true, or?
Well, there is a dimension of how we define the narrative of Myokonin, and it's been said that the Tokugawa government, with their very strict control of society, and they use Buddhism as a means of maintaining order and control. And so in that same vein, they kind of encouraged the myokonins who were, like, as you say, non-threatening, simply spiritual, and not, going against the status quo. So there is that dimension. It's been criticized for that. But I don't think that if you really look at their utterances and how they lived, it shouldn't take away their spiritual qualities. Yeah, I think that we can learn from them. And there are a lot of, and one that I mentioned at the early start of this talk, how the fact that we exist is a miracle in itself, that we need to be grateful for what we have. And the example of Genza, is working out in the field, it's raining cats and dogs, and it's drenching wet. So he finally decides he can't take this anymore. So he goes back home, he's going back home. He passes by his temple, and the head minister sees him and says, "Oh, Genza-san, it must be really hard on you, you're all wet and drenching wet." But Genza says, no, I'm very grateful. And the temple minister says, "Grateful? Why? You're all wet," and he says, "No, I'm grateful for the fact that the holes of my nose are turning downwards." It's a simple story, but that really, I love it. And, okay.
Sensei, I just want to make a comment regarding the diagram that you have there. I'm looking at it in terms from a physics point of view. Balance is very, very important. And whether we're going to be going up and down vertically or not, the fact is that that dimension of verticalness is still going to be there, meaning that it'll go up or down, all right? But the balance needs to be there.
Balance in what sense?
In terms of the core.
The
right?
core,
Yes.
the core.
So that core, where the gravity is, that's what keeps the balance,
Okay.
all right?
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that if you were to, let's say, raise that gravity, that core, then the rest of the diagram would have to go up as well to maintain that balance.
Okay.
From a physics point of view, it would, I think, create an imbalance.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm perhaps
Yeah.
explaining from a different perspective.
Yeah. You're a science person?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm not very scientific, so, but your point is well taken, and but the point, okay, I think, yeah, thank you. The key is that the nature of the objective realm dimension and the nature of the spiritual dimension, and that from a temple perspective, leadership perspective, you need to take all this into account as well. This side as well, not to just cut it off as saying that's secular, that's, so I talk about this is a secularized society. Religion used to play much more of a role. That's the definition. Secularization means that religion no longer has the same impact, the stronghold on people. And so, all the more that's why the religious part has to be at the core. But this has the power and strength to also take in this dimension and nurture people who are on whatever level and to go upwards on this plane. Okay? We have take one or two. Yes.
I guess I just want to come back to my point, is that I don't think that one should negate the fact that that bottom part of your pyramid there, all right? Because that creates that stability, all right? Because the top is this way, you have the bottom as well, which creates that balance.
Okay.
And that regardless of which situation we're in, that we have to perspective on the fact that that bottom pyramid is going to be there as part of mankind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just been Jōdo Shinshu too, that, we shouldn't say, oh, these guys are not us, But we have to be cognizant of the fact that we too, at times, or maybe we may even be lower. Who knows? I mean, it's important to not, I use the word dichotomy, but to say, oh, we're over here and we should be going, but sometimes we find ourselves here too. Okay? Yes.
From my very simplistic perspective, which is sort of a medical background, the World Health Organization talks about quality of life measures.
Yes,
Right?
that's right.
And so one of the things that many medical people leave out is the aspect of spiritualness in quality of life measures. And so my observation, though, is that spiritualness can trump everything else. So you could have a really, really poor quality of life by every other definition. You could have pain, mental suffering, be poor, but that spiritualness could ultimately trump.
Yes. Well, this is what Myokon is representing.
Right, exactly. That's a very good role model example.
Yeah, and so that's the way they have been presented. I visited the temple of another Myokoni, Saichi, last year, and it was kind of moving to be in a temple where Saichi listened to the Dharma. And I met the wife, the Bomori, the wife of the minister, whose mother knew Saichi personally, and she relayed a story that is well known. Saichi was listening to the Dharma, and the guest speaker, the minister, said something to the effect that realizing Shinjin is like winning a lottery. And when he heard that, he jumped up and he started dancing. He goes, Atata, atata. He says, I won. Going all over the place, you know. And people are saying, well, who is that? but you know, for him, this is, you know, he doesn't, he's first person. For I, Shinran alone. For I, Saiji alone. It doesn't matter if people laugh at me, but I have something that we got, that the Dharma espouses. And that part of it I haven't addressed at all. But when I talked about the personal part, whatever you say, you know, in one sense, all these temple things and all the secular things, they're, of course I'm saying, I'm almost contradicting myself. These are important, but ultimately as a Buddhist, if you don't have this to extent, then you're missing something. Because that is the ultimate goal. And I talked to Reverend Izumi a little bit the other day, and we were talking about, you know, Sensei is supposedly the cutest minister, but the oldest in North America. and so I'm sure that he's got it, you know, he's got it. And he asked me, how about you? And I just said, I won. I didn't quite say it that way, but I have, you know, experienced to some extent this sense of peace of mind, or I'm not sure if you can call it shinjin, but because of the Dharma to which I have been connected. And if I was asked 15 years ago, then I would have may not have answered in the way I did, but I feel that this subjective first person, the Dharma, I feel that I have you know, experienced something that confirms my belief that I have been able to attain that which needs to be attained in this life as a Buddhist. And that is, regardless of all the politics and the financial worries that you have with temple, at least, you know, get something from get something meaningful, and that's not you know, worldly benefits or the acknowledgement by you know, your fellow sangha members, but something that is firm in your heart. And so otherwise, I mean, I think that should be at the core. We talked about the core of the organization, but that's the core of your personal participation. Before I move on, I think the fundamental issues of, you know, temple and outreach and all this is a concern to everyone. But we can talk about this, you know, whole day, whole weekend, whole month. And so I think we perhaps don't want to just stay there. But I was talking to some of the ladies back there, and they're looking for the magic bullet, and they thought I have it, and I don't. So I think it's the reality is you know, it's tough. Life is a bumpy road. But some temples are doing better, and Reverend Grant he came to us and he says, you know, we're better off than in Japan, you know, where the situation is, I mean, where the temples are really not very active except for memorial services and funerary rites. But here, it's, you know, it's a real living, dynamic spiritual community. So you should be proud of that. And actually, some ministers who've been to Hawaii and to, you know, overseas, and they learned how to create a community, they go back to Japan, especially the big cities, and they start a temple, and they do very well because they've learned how to create a spiritual community, and financially well too. And but I know at least one whose now temple has 400, 500 members. They're family members. And so that I hope this won't encourage the ministers from Japan here to do the same and leave Canada. We want you here. Yeah. Yes. But I was talking to Harvey, who's from Manitoba. And he says that maybe the Sunday service is 2/3 non-Japanese, and he has some things that he's done or the temple has done. Maybe you can share a little bit about the personal touch and that kind of thing. If you could briefly, yeah. Maybe you can move up here.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
You're a star.
Well, again, there's no magic bullet. A large part of where we are today, I think, is attributed to Frederick Ulrich, our former sensei. He came to our temple with the shared goal of trying to propagate Buddhism and increase membership outside the Japanese Canadian community. And he began with meditation classes every Wednesday. And where our temple is situated, we're situated in the same campus as Winnipeg's largest hospital. And it was amazing who came out to those meditation classes. These were professionals, these were doctors, nurses, lawyers, and they would all come. And over the 10 years that he was with the temple, I think there were some 200 people that attended those classes, some of whom actually moved on to become members and involved in a greater way in our Sangha. But I think the key is to touch and influence people one person at a time. And I think your temple is probably not that dissimilar from our temple, where you get people off the street who are kind of curious. They read an article about Buddhism, they look in the yellow pages, oh, there's a Buddhist church. By the way, we're one of 5 Buddhist temples in Winnipeg. Others are Chinese and Vietnamese. And they come, but it's making them feel comfortable and getting them engaged in activities. So many individuals are involved in cooking, cleaning. We put them on a monthly maintenance cruise. And then eventually they feel a sense of community and they make the commitment to become members. And not everybody can afford to become members, so we'd rather have them participate with the Sangha and give their time. Money is really secondary, because right now manpower is, we're in critical need of manpower. And just recently, we've had 3 of them volunteer to serve on our board. So it happens slowly. It doesn't happen in a day, a week, a month, a year. It's a whole process, but it's approaching those individuals one person at a time, making them feel at home, giving them that sense of community, and getting them involved in some way. And that takes a bit of work too, because different people want to get involved in different ways.
Okay, great. Do you have any questions for Harvey?
Harvey, I understand that Reverend Dunn had a lot of engagement with the First Nations people. We have a pretty strong First Nations community in that particular locale. And I think that had a tremendous effect upon the larger community, did it not?
It did. I mean, he gets invited to speak at many organizations, and there's an Aboriginal group that meets out in Gimli once a year, and he's invited as one of the spiritual leaders from Winnipeg to come and speak. But he does have that connection. I got to admit that I'm not as aware of that connection. Maybe Michael is. But I know that we have one individual who's currently serving on the board. His wife passed away last year. And it was very humbling to see that he wanted to conduct a memorial service for his wife in his own way. So he came to us and said, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to have a memorial service. I'd like to prepare a meal for everybody, but in my own way. Right? So we basically said, that's fine. We let him organize and host a memorial service in the way that he felt was appropriate and comfortable. And we got to enjoy this Aboriginal cuisine. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's not trying to convert people to your way of doing things. It's somehow working together and trying to integrate things and being flexible and reaching compromises. I think that's the key.
How did you reach out to the public to let them know what you had going on in your temple?
Well, again, Frederick is a great ambassador, and actually, I got to thank Grant's father. he was the one that actually introduced us to Sensei Ulrich. And I'll never forget the day, this was going back about 10, 11 years ago. Socho Ikuta brought Frederick. This is the first meeting, so there was a board of directors there. And we thought it would be appropriate to have the seniors come, the elderly advisors. So we had people like Mr. Minamida and Mr. Abe, who long since passed away. And we're sitting there, and everything was going well. And after Socho and Frederick Ulrich left, we sat down with the elders and said, well, what do you think? I mean, this gentleman doesn't speak a word of Japanese. And to the credit of our elders, they had the foresight to say, we need to progress. We need to change. Manitoba Buddhist Temple is not going to survive just on Japanese alone. We don't think that it's going to be an issue. Him just being an English-speaking minister, in fact, it might actually be an advantage because we have to go outside the Japanese community. And the fact is, he brings different things to the table, right? And so he did things like the meditation classes. He was interviewed for a series of talks on Buddhism, which was featured on Joy TV. And I think this summer he did a sequel. He came into the temple and filmed the sequel to that. And he got very involved in the interfaith community. And because of that, there were articles in the newspaper. He was oftentimes interviewed on the radio station. And people just come to learn about Manitoba Buddhist Temple. And then when you have one or two individuals, well, then the word starts propagating out. They start bringing their friends and family members. But again, it was a very long, slow process. But he was a key to it all.
Okay, good. Thank you. So it's quite clear that you had a spiritual leader who reached out. And I know that not all the ministers can do the same. But I think they can, as earlier, they can cultivate maybe others who can reach a higher level of understanding, who then can go out and do more outreach. And also, I remember when I started out, I didn't have much confidence in talking about Buddhism to the wider public, but I made an effort, and I think everyone can, especially ministers, can and should make greater effort to reach out. And it's tough, it's hard, but through practice, you get better, and people are not as critical of you. I mean, many times the larger communities are happy to have Buddhist participation, and so we tend to kind of be more inward. But this is one needs to go out in order to interact with the larger community. And so regarding what Harvey was saying, I think that Harvey was talking about different kinds of people coming into the temple, and the point that I wanted to emphasize was that perhaps not everyone will take real serious interest in Dharma. Spirituality, or people who take religion, spiritual dimension seriously, are often, in any time in history, I think, this is my view, is that are very few. If I would say 15% of the population really take the Dharma or the spiritual seriously. And many others are at a more of a kind of a moral level. They feel content in being part of a spiritual community, but they themselves don't have to get enlightened. They don't have to be Genza or Saichi. And that, I'm sure you realize, but that realization is important in order to keep them within the fold. If you say, well, if you don't reach Shinjin by this and this day, then then most people say, well, goodbye. See you again. Yeah. So, I even, Renyo Shoni, well, you haven't met him, but he's the restorer of our tradition from the 15th century. And he's the one that really made Honganji what it is today. I mean, if it weren't for him, Shinshu would have been, probably petered up. But he really, and he was a charismatic, dynamic speaker. But even he complains in some of the letters. He says, he's teaching the summer session. And he says, I've been talking about the Dharma, and you still aren't interested. You still aren't kind of, bright-eyed and taking interest in the Dharma. And it's like, and he has an analogy of something. It's like you guys are like antlers of a deer. The bees trying to sting or sting the antlers of a deer. It's not going in. It's not sinking in. It's really you're hard-headed. I mean, here's Daniel Shonin, bemoaning, complaining, that you guys don't get it. So I thought, oh, gee, if he can't do it, then but he made the effort, and we can only do so much, But again, the importance is to nurture also people to help. And I don't know in Canada, Socho, I mean, whether you have an active program to nurture ministerial assistants. Do you?
Well, I think we are processing.
You're in the process, okay. So I hope that process becomes culminate in producing ministerial assistants, because they can really, be of help, and one minister just can't do a lot. I mean, the job description of a minister is very demanding if you were to do it completely, and everybody has his or her strengths. So that's the other point, and so I think we basically kind of, and the other thing is, I was talking to Reverend Miyamura, and I asked him, what is your thought? And he said, basically comes down to this: are you ready to make the shift? And well, Manitoba seems to have made the shift, but Toronto is much bigger, and you have sufficient number of people, so you don't have, you see the trend, but you're not motivated as much to make the shift or to go in that direction. And so that's the question I leave to you. I mean, the responsibility lies with you. I mean, it's but I think it's probably harder for sufficiently endowed temples to see things, because things are going okay for now, but 20 years, 30 years, another 40 years from now, where will you be? And probably the writings on the wall are pretty clear. And the other thing is, I mean, I think we're not advocating this just because for the survival of the temple. And that's important, obviously, but I think it comes down again to the spiritual part, that we feel comfortable being with people that are of your kind. And I think it was another session recently where I talked about, I used to attend, when I came from Japan at the age of 10, I attended Seventh-day Adventist church. And so it was, the minister was great, and he was such a, someone I respected, but I just had problem with their doctrine, the doctrine that omniscient, omnipotent God created everything. If he's so omnipotent, omniscient, why is the world so messed up? That's the theodicy question. But when I went to a Buddhist church a year and a half later, I was attracted to the teaching of impermanence, interdependence, which makes sense. Okay? But I also have to acknowledge the fact that I was attracted and felt comfortable because of the cultural ethnic dimension. I mean, I had just come over at the age of 10 in a new country, and I was, probably unconsciously going through a lot. But when I went there, they had udon and all this, chicken teriyaki, although that's not really Japanese. It's North American probably. But so I have to acknowledge the cultural dimension, and there's a comfort in that, okay? There's comfort in that. But I really think that that doesn't compare with the experience of being able to relate to another human being on a human-to-human level based on the Dharma, and the joy and the kind of a depth of satisfaction you get because you relate to someone regardless of, you know, ethnic and racial background. And that is what Dharma affords us. And you know, that's part of the core experience of the spiritual. And so the comfort of being with your own kind is really is satisfying, but it's limited. And you really don't know it until you kind of go out of the well. You know, in a way, you're being a frog in a well. Is that an American? No, that's a Japanese, Japanese metaphor. You're being a frog in a well. You know, okay, you can learn a different cultural analogy, and you know, but once you get out, you see that you were in a well, and there's a greater ocean there. And okay, so let's move on to where. Okay, we're at the bottom of B, first page still, and I don't have to try to spend too much time because I referred to this. B2, again, we all acknowledge that Buddhism is in a much better shape. It has a good image. I don't mention here, but in a survey, 65% of the people indicated that if Buddhism were to become stronger in the U.S., will you be in favor of it or against it? And 65%, I believe, was a figure that said yes. So that's a favorable view that a lot of people have of Buddhism, and that it's regarded as peaceful and tolerant, and so. And the fact that you have role models that are everywhere, like Richard Gere and Tiger Woods and Keanu Reeves, who's a Canadian, Leonard Cohen is a Canadian, and all of these people, are and so Diana Eck, who is the professor at Harvard on interreligious religion in America, and she. One of the videos concluded the video by saying, Buddhism is now an American religion. And when I heard that, I was very happy because, I always thought Buddhism, even, being a practicing Buddhist, it's an Asian religion. But Buddhism is now an American religion, Canadian religion. And I, in the U.S., I don't know what Jeff Wilson thinks, but I estimate Buddhism will become number 2 religion in America, overtaking Judaism in the next 40 years, for sure. And if it doesn't pan out that way, no one can criticize me because I won't be here. But what do you think? It's 2% now. The Jewish people of Jewish with 2%, and they're not growing because they don't proselytize. But the converts and probably immigrants to Buddhism is now at 1.2 if you take the latest figure, and it's going to continue to grow, and it will, in terms of number, will surpass Judaism, and then so that will make you number 2, although it's far behind Christianity, which is at 76 and 8%. Though Christianity is going down in terms of numbers. And I estimate probably will decrease somewhat too because of all these non-affiliated people. And then amongst a lot of these 19% or 1/3 young people who are not affiliated, I think that there'll be a sizable number who will take interest in Buddhism. Unfortunately, these people are more free what is it, the free will people, and they don't want to be tied down. So that's another issue, that they may take interest in Buddhism, but the very nature of people who are attracted to Buddhism, they don't like organizations, or they don't want to be, labeled as a Buddhist or whatever. So you have to work with people like that. But they could contribute because they are, honestly interested. And so please keep that in mind. Jeff, you have anything to add? Because
Sure. I think the way that
you want to come up here? Yeah. See, I'm doing this so I don't have to talk all the time. No. Yes. By the way, I mean, he's probably very modest and humble. He won't say, but he's one of the key people in the study of Buddhism in the West. He started a section at the American Academy of Religion, and so you have an authority in this area. So please.
Okay, well, just very briefly, I think the comment I would make in relationship to this topic is that Dr. Tanaka is right that the numbers are going up of formal, membership or identity. I am a Buddhist in this way, right? But to me, as a researcher, what I find more interesting, in fact, is the larger population of people who are encountering Buddhism and being influenced by Buddhism without necessarily, becoming 100% Buddhist and claiming that and so on in this way, right? There was a study about 10 years ago in the United States, looking at that population specifically, which found that approximately 1 out of every 8 Americans, that's 12.5% of the population, or something on the order of 30 million adults, responded to the poll saying that they include Buddhism as an aspect of their spirituality. Okay, 30 million plus people. Okay, does that mean there's 30 million Buddhists in the U.S.? No, that's not at all what it means. What it means is that significant numbers of Christians, significant numbers of Jews, significant numbers of these spiritual but not religious people, they are encountering Buddhism and they're finding something of value in Buddhism, and so that Buddhism is influencing them to some degree, enough that they would report it on a poll here, right? That number also includes the the 1.2 million actual Buddhists, but obviously the huge number of people are people who are not members of the temple and not people who identify as Buddhists, but they have been positively influenced by it, right? If they had a bad time with Buddhism, then I could say, oh yeah, I'll keep that as part of my spirituality. They would move on to something else, right? So that's, to me, a very interesting idea. We have not run a similar, sociological study in Canada, but I suspect we would find somewhat similar numbers. In fact, the percentage of spiritual but not religious people is higher in Canada than in the U.S., right? So it's not nearly to the extent of the unchurchy going on in Europe. We're kind of an in-between situation here. So all the trends that he's talking about that relate to the U.S. Absolutely apply here. In fact, there's stronger trends here. So if we have a similar sort of phenomenon, then that we can guess at, that there's many people encountering Buddhism, aspects of Buddhism at least, such as mindfulness, meditation, other things, and being positively influenced. I like to think of those as people that are part of this conversation we have here. So when I think of, for example, this tent here, I think a lot of cases where we're treating this tent as the temple, right? And people are under the roof of the temple. But I like to think of it in terms of the tent is in fact Canada. And the pole is perhaps the temple where the Dharma is most encountered. But who's underneath it are not just the people who come in under it, but that we have some sort of role in serving the whole society by bringing the Dharma to them wherever they are, whoever they are, all this sort of stuff. So the temples are most important because they will, I think, always in the end be the poles that hold the whole structure up, right? But at the same time, we have a responsibility, I think, to help others encounter the Dharma throughout society, and then they will. There's no way that all of Canada will ever become entirely Buddhist. That's never going to happen. I don't think that's our goal. But as we are able to help the light of the Dharma shine on ever wider populations within the temple and also beyond the temple, this can only be helpful to all of them. And of course, in the feedback way, this can only be helpful to the temples too, overall, right? Anyways, those are my observations.
Thank you. So, well, that is a much broader perspective, which certainly is important. I think it's just, yeah. I think that is a vital perspective. But the reality is that many of you are just having a hard enough time just maintaining the temple,
Right.
and so again, how to get human power to support that endeavor is a big issue. And so lay people, I've been emphasizing the ministerial assistants, but we're talking about lay people who can also, who are not MAs, who can also do what they can. But I know that to actually go out in a larger society to talk about Buddhism is it's a tall order for a lot of people. But again, we need that. And maybe you don't have to rely just on your temple and you rely on headquarters or BCA or, Yes?
I think though, as Jeff was alluding to, the society is changing so much that it's not as difficult for people to walk into a temple as it may have been 30 years ago, because you see Buddhist imagery throughout society. So, 30 years ago, if somebody wanted to walk in a temple, that took a lot of guts. Now, today, I don't think it's quite the same. So we're in a way positive.
Yeah. Well, that's my point. That the North America is Buddhism is in a much better position. Simply put, I mean the numbers bear that out. And yeah. So okay. So that part, if you want to read more, I had an article in. So I'm kind of mentioning my articles in Wheel of Dharma. It's online if you want to look at it, and Dr. Wilson has his books, and so if you read Japanese, I have a book that I published in Japanese called Americano Bukkyo. Ramyoka, do you know that I have a book out on American Buddhism? No, you don't know. So if you buy it, I'll sign it for you. And it won't be extra charge.
I know. The first book he came out with, what was the Chinese? Pure Land.
Dharma, Pure Land Buddhist Studies.
That was when he signed it. I still treasure.
Next to Butsudan? Okay, but Buddhism in Canada, you have 2 new books that you can really get into on page 2. Wild Geese, Buddhism in Canada, and Victor Horry, Professor Horry, whom I know well, he's one of the people. In fact, probably he's the spearhead for this. Flowers on the Rock, Global and Local Buddhism. This came out just this year, and I don't know. I haven't read it, but read them. But do you have any?
I'm reviewing it right now for the Journal of Buddhism.
You did. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So what do you think?
Can I say something
Yes,
about
sure.
those books? Very honored to say those 2 books we donated.
Oh, okay.
BDK donated.
Yeah. BDK is doing so much. Yeah, great.
And
Yes.
John Harding is one of our workshop instructors for the convention next year, for the women's convention next year.
Oh, really?
Bravo.
See, is he a professor somewhere?
University of Leicester.
Oh, I see. Okay.
These are
Mhm.
often advising our temple.
I see. Okay, so so you have these resources to know more about what's going on regarding Buddhism in Canada, and so I need to kind of look at these. Okay. Then now I'm going to kind of move towards a somewhat more a different direction, and well, I spoke earlier here at this point how in this model the Buddhism, while it's here vertical, but we need to kind of incorporate the horizontal, and particularly mental here is more the realm of psychology. And so my thesis is that we can utilize aspects of psychology to clarify Buddhism, or to contextualize Buddhism so that we can have more people take interest in it. And so here we have this model that I've been using a lot, and some of you are familiar with Jean Piaget, who is a Swiss, developmental psychologist, and well, one of his theories have to do with that when we are born, we haven't quite developed the personal, basically, I guess you can call it in one sense ego. And then as we develop into adulthood, and we develop this way. And transpersonal is, I think we can see it as non-self. In Buddhism, we talk about muga, non-self, going beyond ego, and that's the realm of the spiritual. And so transpersonal psychology includes this dimension, and this part is often identified with different spiritual traditions. And so now, traditional Buddhism tends to speak from this transpersonal, non-self perspective. Or you can say a realm of enlightenment, or values awakening, realm of awakening. So these enlightened Myokonins or Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, the teachings are basically based on their experiences, and we're supposed to aim towards it, which is, makes sense. Buddhism is a religion of awakening, so we aspire and we cultivate ourselves to reach this level of awakening. And so now, but however, often what happens in my view, and is that when we speak from this point of view, we just categorically say, oh, ego is no good. Self, any kind of individual, whatever words you use, basically the personal, the self, the ego, we have to overcome, and because it gets in the way of reaching the ultimate level. Is that right? Well, in a way, ego is based on, the three poisons of greed, anger, or hatred. How we put stupidity. So that's the gas, the blind passion that supposedly prop the ego up. But my point is, obviously, ego is limited. Ego is not ultimately fulfilling, and that's why one needs to go all the way to awakening in the Buddhist sense to attain enlightenment and be totally free and liberated. But we have to be careful in how we talk about, criticize the ego, and because in order to, and many Buddhists, especially in the U.S. and in North America, will say that you cannot overcome the ego without having the ego. The strong ego, strong sense of the self is important, and so that's the point I'm trying to make. And so on 4, rather than taking a one-dimensional view of the ego, the self, I'm saying healthy sense of self is necessary for leading a life in the world, and obviously, a strong sense of the self is is necessary to communicate with others, have the confidence to pursue what you need to do. So we need to acknowledge the difference between self-love, which is healthy, and narcissism, if you can use that word, which is unhealthy. Higher, degree of selfishness or sense of this insecurity in narcissism, and so self-love is good, but narcissism is of course problematic. So we can't put all of it in one bag. And when the Buddhists attack what we deem as self-centered thoughts and actions, we are targeting the narcissistic self. And then we know about the Abraham Maslow, healthy self that has realized what Abraham Maslow called the level of self-actualization or actualized self, really approximates some of the traits of Buddhist non-self. So when self is actualized to a higher level, Maslow has a theory of desire, and then there are different levels. At the highest level, you have what is called self-actualization or realization. And if you look at the people who are thought to have actualized themselves, they have qualities that are maybe can be shared by those who we think are enlightened. So non-prejudicial, and their lives are dedicated to solving problems, and they are directed morally. They have strong sense of the ethical and the moral, but it's not because someone tells them from above or because the religion tells them, but it's because they're self-directed in a moral sense. They're much more, they're virtue, what's called virtue ethic, as opposed to obligation ethics. And they're spontaneous in their actions and words, and they're creative and accepting of others. So the kind of higher level ego, personal, this is what you call it, level, is important. Should not be categorically rejected as being lower than the non-self and awakening. So last year, we invited for this Buddhist Psychology Association that I'm affiliated with. We invited Mark Epstein. Have you heard of Mark Epstein, who's written a number of articles, books on Buddhism and psychology? He himself was a Buddhist first, and then later became interested in psychology or psychiatry. And he's now a psychiatrist working in New York, and he's used Buddhist thought and Buddhist practices to help his profession. And so he argues for the importance of healthy self. We must acknowledge that there are limits as well as pain associated with even this realized self. Okay, so now I'm kind of going beyond this. So I've argued for the importance of the healthy self, but from the Buddhist perspective, or even away from the Buddhist perspective, healthy self is limited, because that ultimately we become old, we die, we lose control of our activities. So if we rest your whole life on the self, your image of the self, you are bound to be disappointed and to experience anxiety, etc. So that's where Buddhism, traditional Buddhism, kicks in and says that, well, there is another way of looking at the self, and that is the non-self, what we call the non-self. Non-self, actually realizing in one sense that you are part of a interdependent net of jewels, so that there's a metaphor of the jewel, and that you are not existing by itself. You were not born by yourself, but you continue to be an integral part of this interdependent network. And that is when you're looking at the self. So this is an advancement over kind of an autonomous self that you have here. And Mark Epstein says that psychology, though it's helpful to Buddhism, that it's still, psychology doesn't go far, and ultimately Buddhism offers a higher, well, at least a higher understanding of the self and the nature of reality, where one comes to enlightenment and fulfillment, and that psychology can also benefit from Buddhism. So there is a kind of a give and take. And what psychology offers to Buddhism is that the personal, the healthy ego is good and important. Okay? And rather than just rejecting. But that is also limited. And ultimately, there is another level of understanding the self, which is the Buddhist way. And that Buddhism has known this for 2,600 years, and that psychology is now coming to that realization. And so psychology, especially in the West, is learning from Buddhism. And so it's a healthy relationship. And so, and there is this metaphor of the pole. Let me just kind of summarize and kind of summarize with another metaphor, which I don't know if I remember if I mentioned this last year, the pole vault. Maybe I didn't, which is good. Which is good. But even if I had said it, he probably wasn't listening. So. No, I have to qualify that because he was an organizer, so he was running around. So okay. Now this one I have taken out a copyright, so if you use it, oh gee, no, I can't. I'm getting my ego involved, so I can't draw it. This is pole vault. You know how, well, here's the bar, and here's the athlete, and he's holding the pole, and he's, well, anyway, he's dashing and towards the pit, and then he plants the thing right here, and then he goes, and the purpose is go over this, right? The point is that I see this as the healthy ego, and psychology just can help you kind of develop this, and so this part of the healthy ego is where you have the pole and you rush and you dash towards the bar, and then you plant the pole and you have to leap. But if you hang on to the ego, maybe you can say the ego. If you hang on to the ego, you will never get over the bar. And Buddhism is here. And non-ego. And so you need to rush, you need the speed, what is it, not inertia, what is it?
Momentum.
What?
Momentum.
Momentum, yeah, momentum. To go over, to go up, at some point, what do you have to do?
Release the bar.
You have to let go. Yeah. You have to let go of the bar. And that's the essence of Buddhism, is to let go of the bar. So my point is that if we as Buddhists consider letting go of the bar is important, then we have to also acknowledge that healthy ego is important. And so we need to be open to other disciplines, especially psychology, to affirm a healthy ego. And Buddhism actually can also help in this cultivating a healthy ego. But anyway, do you get the metaphor? Do you think it's good?
Is it going to be in your next book?
Poll. Yeah. Well, thank you for giving new ideas. Pole. Yeah. Let it go. Yeah.
We should get copyright too then.
Yeah. Well, I'll mention your name in the. Actually, I've already published I gave a talk in Japanese, and this, I didn't bring it with me, but someone, the illustrator, did a really nice job of illustrating this. So, it's wonderful when someone takes what you said and draws a picture. And by the way, my ocean book, the cover, if the cover is actually a cake. And if you ever looked at it closely, oh, I have a copy. I carry it all the time.
Evil.
Yeah.
But I don't put it next to the Robotsukan.
It's not signed then.
No, okay, so this one is a cake. And I gave a series of talk in Sacramento, way a number of years before this came out. And the student, at the end of the class, they want to have a party, and they went to a baker and told them the story. And the baker, who knew nothing about Buddhism, and heard the story, and this is the cake, and they illustrated. It's really wonderful. And it has kind of a lively, sense to it, which I liked. And so in Japan, this has been translated to Japanese. It's called Shinshu Nyuma, Introduction to Buddhism. And it's sold pretty well as well. Probably because of the population base, even more. And partly because I use it for my textbook. Dr. Wilson, we all do this. We write our books and we make the students buy them. Yeah, but that one, it's in the 10th printing. It's amazing. So, but anyway, so this was an example of sharing how it's wonderful that you tell a story and someone else understands it and using their expertise to create something that's very meaningful. And I will maybe do this with this profile. But anyway, the point is, I think Buddhism in this secularized society with people, I think many years ago, in the past, Buddhism or religion had a monopoly a monopoly of worldview. That only thing that was going on for ordinary people is religion, especially in the countryside. And the monks and priests were the most educated, and they set the standard basically. And so that's why it's a much more religiously. People had a religious outlook on life, but now people have their other disciplines. Science, for a fact. I mean, science has really kind of put a kink in the efforts of religion. And Buddhism, we don't have to worry too much about the conflict with science because Buddhism is much more, in tune with science. And Dalai Lama is a good example. I mean, he's a spiritual leader, but he's very knowledgeable about science, and he continues to have these sessions with world-class scientists. In fact, he was invited to American Neurological Society, an academic meeting, and there were people who opposed having the Dalai Lama at the science meeting. And so there was a big controversy, but the supporters, stuck with it. And when he showed up, 5,000 people were ready in the audience, fighting for the seat. And so so ultimately it's a huge conference. So like 10,000 people came and heard him speak. And he has a book on one atom and the universe or something like this. And so I think Buddhism is not in conflict with science, but I think Buddhism has to work with other disciplines to make its point. And so that's the part of the upaya, or the skillful means of affirming other disciplines to help our cause. Okay, I guess I'll take a break, question or,
I have
yes.
one comment to make.
Yes.
And that is, this concept of a healthy ego
Mhm.
has such an implication on our educational system.
Mm.
I come from an educational background as well. And you know, in education, we talk about developing this positive self-ego for our children. There comes a point where there needs to be a balance. Positive self-image
Mhm.
and of self-concept. Now, I worry about the fact that today we have so much to say about bullying.
Bullying, yeah.
Yes. And that has really an offshoot of the kind of educational system that we may have in certain sectors, where we have not really gone into the point of saying to them, terrifying, and creating a healthy ego. And so, in education, Maslow's been around for years and years, for decades. And to try and get these young children to understand that ego is important,
Yeah.
because that's what will get them to what they want to get to. At the same time, there needs to be a softening of that ego,
Yeah.
such that they can then coexist with other people as well.
Yeah, okay. So I think you brought up a point that I wanted to make, is that I talked about how psychology can help to develop a strong sense of the self, but Buddhism can contribute in this process, and it can do so by providing a sense of, connectedness to the wider world. And so the concept of interdependence, interconnectedness, it can be taught to adolescents who are, reaching adulthood, that they are not alone, that they're not autonomous, and that they're part of a greater network of interdependence. And so even at this level, although Buddhism tends to lead, is meant for leading people at this level and speaking from this perspective, but this can obviously be applied at this level, and to cultivate, to help in the creation and cultivation of healthy ego, because healthy ego, from my understanding, cannot be created without a sense that you are connected to a larger realm. And Buddhism, in many ways, can do that very well. Yes?
I think the whole time you're talking, Dogen really says it best. His very famous statement that to know the self is to study the self is to forget the self.
Yeah.
That really completes the circle.
Yeah. So can you say it louder so they can hear? Yeah, I think you said it very fast.
You can
Okay.
repeat.
Well, Dogen, who is the the founder of the Soto school of Buddhism, or Zen, and his famous line is, "What the aim of Buddhism is to learn about Buddhism, and to learn about learn about the self. The aim of Buddhism is learn about the self. To learn about the self means to forget the self. Forget the self. To forget the self means to be enlightened by all beings in the universe. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all beings." So maybe this is the right time to talk about, mention then we'll take a break. I mentioned this at the very end of another analogy of this, the simple one. It's a wave in the ocean. And you probably, some of the ministers, you probably use this, but I really like this one. And so, ocean, and wave. So, that quote by Dogen, "To know the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self that you are enlightened by all beings in the universe, or all things." So here's ego, or self. So in a way, each of us is like a wave in the ocean. And so if we see ourselves just as a wave, we know that eventually this will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so this wave is about 30 years old, and Reverend Miyamura is okay, we're about, he's a little older than me.
1 year.
Yeah, so let's face it, we're this wave over here.
Yeah.
Okay. So eventually, this wave is gonna rejoin the ocean. And so, but first of all, if you only see the wave, it's going to get smaller and smaller, you eventually disappear. Buddhism teaches us that, your wave is really connected to the ocean. You cannot have a wave, you don't exist without the ocean. The food that we just ate this time, the friendship that we receive from our friends, the love and compassion that we receive from our parents and family, all of the spiritual, the physical, the mental, all this nourishment makes our way possible. Okay? But those who don't have the Buddhist message or that kind of message, they just say, I am just a wave, and this wave is definitely, they know it's going to get smaller and smaller and eventually disappear, and there's a great sense of anxiety there. But if you know that actually this wave is connected, so this I is connected to something greater, then there's even when this disappears, you will still be part of this great ocean. Now, this level of understanding, in my view, is somewhat limited because, and it's something that needs to be told at that level of healthy self. I think adolescence, as I was saying earlier, you're not alone. Actually, if you really look at it, there is a community, there is a family. Hopefully, the problem is that some young people don't have that, but that's why we have to. The society has to help providing that kind of community, a sense of the other for these young people. But anyway, at the higher level of awareness, I is not just a wave. Ocean is I. And if you get to that level, then you have expressions by these spiritual adepts who look at the flower and they say, flower is I, the mountain is I. And so I is not just here and connected to the greater. That's one higher level of understanding. But even a deeper understanding is that I is no longer just this, but it's the entire ocean. And then, there's much more sense of ease because you're not even conscious of the wave. Though I think it's probably quite difficult for most ordinary people like us well, I should say like me, to get to that level of total oneness. That's at a higher level. But that's what Buddhism talks about, I think. And then the other point I wanted to make is that when you are a wave, then become the best wave you can be. Reach out as high as possible and be uniquely your wave. And that's the part about my point about a healthy self. And Buddhism shouldn't say, well, that you're being too egotistic or self-centered. But for young people especially, let them reach out as high as possible. But they also have to learn at the same time they're not all by themselves, that you're not accomplishing this all by yourself, but you are being supported by this great ocean. Without the ocean, you don't exist. So with that kind of realization, maybe they will have a greater sense of, they'll succeed more because they'll have a sense of responsibility. And so this is one way of looking at this earlier part, the part that was mentioned, how that young people need to have a greater sense of healthy ego and okay, for the last session, well, before that, during the break, we had some interesting conversation. Reverend Endo asked me, is marriage source of suffering? No, that was a question he asked. So, well.
How did you answer?
He said, sometimes, but most of the time it's source of, fulfillment and joy. So, go for it. But before that, I said, well, where's my wife? I said, if I keel over now, the saddest person will be my wife, I think. I have full confidence that she will be the saddest person. Okay. No, it's harder than talking about Dharma, that. You guys are all laughing, but you just, you're laughing because you understand, for those of you who have experienced. But actually, it is true that I learned a lot about myself in my interaction with my wife. And as you know, relationship undergoes change. When you have kids, and then now that we're empty nested, we have a lot more time together, and we that's all we have, and so we need to really, work, and then you find out more things about each other because, that's all, we're just focused on each other, and so I'm learning more things about her after 38 years. It's interesting, so, and.
She get a dog.
Get a dog. Was that your solution? Yeah.
That works.
Yeah, it works. Well, we have stray cats.
Oh, yeah.
But that's going to be topic of my sermons on Sundays. So if you want to hear about stray cats, come on Sundays. Yeah.
James, Reverend Endo already has a dog.
Well, you already have a dog.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, Reverend Endo does.
Oh. So you don't need a wife.
Going downhill.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we're on page 2 at the bottom, practical application. The rest of it, I'm not sure how much to talk about, but I'm just going to go lightly. And basically, as you know, Jōdo Shinshu does not have a practice, the practice. Although I think reciting the name is a practice for us. But I think on the for membership or people in North America, religion needs to be much more broad because in traditional Japanese presentation, the emphasis was on shinjin. If you get shinjin, everything will be solved. And then the ethical dimension is hardly ever mentioned. That is, in Japan, whether you're Shinshu or Nichiren or Zen, I think, my opinion, that their ethical basis standard is what you call kind of generalized Japanese common sense. Society has a very strong sense of what is right and wrong, and they know how to act each other. So they don't need a kind of a religiously based morality or ethics. But when you bring a religious tradition to America, and if you only bring the spiritual dimension, it's not enough to satisfy the needs of especially children and even adults. And I think you have to have a broader approach that is more, that would require people, well, this is not an absolute statement, but a framework in which people are required to aspire to a certain thing and function and practice and act in a certain way, and that is, so I advocate the much more active application of 6 paramitas, perfections. And in Jōdo Shinshu, it's not anything foreign, but we don't, traditional Shinshu, we don't really push that. Isn't that right? I mean, traditional. In America, in Canada, I'm sure that so-called general Buddhism, to which 6 paramitas may be placed, has been emphasized much more than in Japan. But Buddhism without training is not really Buddhism. As I said earlier, Buddhism is not a religion of belief, but it's a religion of awakening. To be awakened, you have to cultivate yourself, and you have to act and think in a certain way. At least, have a framework. And if you're a monk, you have 227 precepts in Southeast Asia. If you are Northern tradition, 250. And if you're a woman, you have more precepts. And don't ask me why there are more precepts. Well, in Southeast Asia, it's 227, and I believe it's about 350 for nuns. And so, but we are not monks or nuns. So, but that doesn't mean that we are, we're relieved of not practicing them. In Southeast Asia, ordinary person, they recite the 5 precepts all the time, as part of the practice. And to become a Buddhist, you recite the 5 precepts: not to take life, not to lie, and then not to engage in sexual misconduct. And the last one is not to take alcoholic and beverages. So that's why I think I don't include in the 6 paramitas. There is no such prohibition. So the Northern tradition, we're safe. So please turn to the 3 trainings are the basics. Buddhist precepts, meditation, and wisdom. We often talk about wisdom. Wisdom doesn't just come, but one has to cultivate himself through some kind of meditation, some kind of precepts. And these are all, it's a set. And then, so the 6 perfections there are 6 of them. And, you all know these Dharma, conduct. The 10 virtuous acts. The 10 virtuous acts is part of the 6 paramitas. And there, again, there's no prohibition of alcoholic beverages. So it's in some ways it's easier for Jōdo Shinshu Buddhists. And then effort, patience, and then there's meditation, which I think we can kind of adapt to Shinshu. And when I was a minister for 3 years in California, I did Nembutsu meditation, and people often call the temple and they say, "Do you do meditation?" And then initially I said, "No, we don't." And they said, "Thank you very much." And they won't come. They won't be interested. So I changed soon after, and I said, "Yeah, well, we have we do kind of a meditation." And then, those who are interested, they came. And I had them just simply go through the, simple act of, bowing. For us it's very natural, but for new people, bowing itself is a, kind of a serious act. And then doing oshoko, and then when we receive the book Chodai, these motions are like meditated. They're done mindfully and with reverence and quiet. And then we do the chanting, and then chanting is a form of meditation. It can be very soothing. So I don't see why we cannot have the Nembutsu, what I'm calling Nembutsu meditation, a Shinshu form of meditation. We cannot help people in Zen meditation because we don't have the training. We shouldn't purport to know how to lead that kind of meditation. But most people would be happy with this kind of meditation, and then of course, and then have them sit quietly for a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then chanting. And I understand from some of the people here that they find chanting that Reverend Christina does very soothing, very meaningful. And so, and I think again, the biggest reason for I think the number one reason for the draw to Buddhism in the West is meditation. Of course, the teachings, has appealing, but it's meditation that draws people. Mindfulness is huge, and it's beyond religion. It's into the medical field and psychotherapy. And this March, I visited Boston and went to the place where mindfulness started, which is a place called Barre. Is that how you pronounce it? Barre. Okay. Well, anyway, it's really out in the boondocks. But there are, beautiful facilities, and I understood from the people there that there's so much interest in mindfulness practice that even they have practices sessions just for young people, young adults, and even that's you got to be put on the waiting list. And so the mindfulness interest in mindfulness is huge, and we have to understand that that is one of the draws to Buddhism, and I'm sure that there will be many people who will be coming to your temples because of that. And do you just simply reject them, or do you say, yeah, we have a form of meditation, and you can, adapt as I did when I was at a temple. And so, and then the wisdom part, and this is my adaptation, is that wisdom part is the cultivation, the 4 marks of existence, and in the 4 marks of existence, which and in the Ocean book, I use a more everyday language of this one over here. Issai Kaiku in Japanese is all personal experience is lead to suffering, but bumpy. Life is a bumpy road. Life is intricate. Life is important. Life is great. And so, kind of keeping that as a central concept for us to think about. And when this deepens, and as we go through the other paramitas, you find, you learn more about yourself. For example, dana is supposed to be unconditional giving, but we learn that we often cannot do unconditional giving. That if you donate $1,000, you probably want your name mentioned somewhere, right? Gee, no answer. Maybe you're all much more enlightened than I am. I mean, I actually I actually donated $1,000, which is unthinkable because, for many, many years, I was a graduate student for 15 years. And I finally got my Ph.D. at the age of 38. So my mother-in-law told my wife, she says, I understand your husband is very smart, but if he's so smart, how come he can't get a job? 38, I'm still. So anyway, I'm mentioning this because we're very poor. We're just talking about a cup of coffee. How we were happy, if he could afford a $1 coffee at Starbucks, it wasn't Starbucks then, back then. And so we were, but anyway, given this kind of background, I did donate $1,000 to Jōdo Shinshu Center in Berkeley because I think it's really important. And, but I didn't get any acknowledgement, for a long time. So that's why I emailed Robert Noguchi. I said, "Where's my acknowledgement?" So the point I'm making, which you guys are very serious, I don't know, is that I wanted acknowledgement for the fact that I donated $1,000. I don't need the wall, have my name on the wall. In fact, for $1,000 you can't get your name on the wall. But that's okay. But my point is that unconditional dana is difficult to practice. And even when I often talk about in Japan, when you give up your seat for someone elderly, and if that little grandma doesn't even say thank you, you kind of say, kind of impolite, or, you have that kind of. Anyway, so that's why I think these practices are important, because by engaging with what we consider to be an ideal, you find more about yourself. And this is exactly what Shinran experienced. 20 years on Mandiye, doing practices that are much more rigorous than this. He came to realization because of that engagement with the practice, that he has too filled with gas, greed, anger, hatred. And so some people say, well, Jōdo Shinshu, we don't need to teach that because we already have the answer. Shinjin, the other power. Just open yourself to that. If you can do that, that's great. And I think that's definitely, I'm not negating this, but I'm saying for the membership in the Western world, members who want to get something and be a Buddhist, for Jōdo Shinshu, because we don't have anything explicit, I'm just saying 6 paramitas would be a good guideline. And then the wisdom part is actually the most important in some sense, because ultimately Shinjin awareness, realization. By the way, Shinjin, I've been arguing, and it's like, that Shinjin is really, Shinjin is translated what?
Faith.
Faith and what else?
Trust.
Yeah, entrusting. Okay, faith, entrusting. Faith, especially entrusting, is becoming most dominant. I think true entrusting. Probably Dr. Taimundo is one of the advocates of this, and others have, But I find that is one dimension of Shinjin. Shinjin has multiple meanings, and I don't agree in just confining to entrusting. There is realization, there is joy, there is overcoming of doubt, and these 4 dimensions. Overcoming doubt is 1, joy 2, and wisdom, understanding. And I'll be writing an article in academic in Japan about this. I've already written elsewhere that I prefer to translate Shinjin as realization. Of course, in Ocean I used awareness, Shinjin awareness. Yes.
Grant's father used to often credit to say true and real mind, which
true and real mind. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. True and real mind. Yeah. That is one of the definitions, but there is kind of the what I call normative language, and then more experiential language, and I'm focusing more on the experiential part of it. It's true that it's true and real mind, and that I wouldn't negate. But experientially, there are those 4 dimensions. So distinction between normative and you can even call it prescriptive or experiential. Yeah. So okay. But either way, the Shinjin is much more multidimensional. And so, if these are the four marks of existence, and this becomes more personal, you come to realize this, and then you can provide a basis and a foundation for Shinjin realization, which is the spiritual aim of Jōdo Shinshu. Okay, so the point is that we have a framework, kind of a practice that people can engage in, and and regardless of the traditional argument between other power and self-power, these are just on a different realm, and I think that on a practical level, Shinshu can use the application of Dharma, 6 paramitas. Okay, and let me just quickly talk about one example of how to use psychological framework, and I don't know how many of you are aware of Albert Ellis, and he's a promoter of rational emotive behavioral therapy. And I found actually ABC, if you look at ABC, and I'm not going to write this, his view, okay, A is activating agent, which is something happens in life. That's an activating, okay? And B is what you think about it, and how your belief that forms or determines how you look at the activating agent. And based on that, you get the consequence. Either you suffer, or you have anxiety, or do you don't have that kind of negative thoughts. So here is an example, just focusing on ABC. And I found that when I discovered this in Japan, actually, not too long ago, in my activities with Buddhist psychology, that this is exactly the way I was giving my sermons back in California. That, something happened, you take a problem, an event, but I'm arguing that, well, if you look at it Buddhistically, then see the consequence will be much more joyful and less anxiety-ridden. And so, if you take an example, and here's one example. This was given by a Buddhist priest who is involved in this kind of rational emotive behavioral therapy. And so here is an example. Oh, I'm sorry. I changed that. I took my own example. That happened recently because it's more meaningful. What happened was I was in charge of having a party for the new faculty members to our department. So I went to this restaurant manager, but she was kind of rude and not responsive. And most in Japan people are very friendly. But she somehow, and I had been to that restaurant before, and I went because it had a nice environment and it was relatively cheap. But she was very, unfriendly and rude in her answers, and so this is the activating agent, okay? So, I jump to C, and I got upset, and got annoyed, and I told her off, I debated whether, should I hold back or should I do it? And then finally, before I decided, just came out. And I told her how rude she was, and here I'm a customer, and so, but the problem is that I should have just criticized her action. But I even went on to say, well, you're this type, And I know I shouldn't do this, but I did, and I even said, does this happen often? Do people do this? And so anyway, I was upset the way she treated me, or what I thought she treated me, but I got even more, I felt a greater sense of guilt because I went a little too far. But now, so I did it because my belief might be, I had the assumption that that she should be more considerate and friendly, especially the customer. That's my belief. That's my kind of, I'm attached to my belief. That's why when something happens, then the C becomes more negative. I feel guilty, I feel bad. And that's the essence of Buddhism, actually, that whatever happens, there's no value. Things just happen. That's the basic belief. There's whatever that happens from an ultimate standpoint is neither good nor bad. It happens. It's due to cause and effect. It just happens. But how you take that event will determine how you feel under C, the consequence. The event that one example I often give is if like a homeless person, all kind of in smelly clothes and he comes running in, or not running in, he walks in and he says something kind of with a loud voice, then most of us will get upset and scared, and maybe some of us may yell and get upset. But that's because we have kind of the belief that someone who looks like that is kind of can hurt us. But if a Buddha was here and he would see any person, regardless of how one looks, as another human being, and would not feel a sense of panic and anxiety that we do. So the point is that what we believe and our belief it determines how we experience that event, and the event is neutral, and that's the basic understanding, I think, outlook on Buddhism. And then there's a disputing effect, and you kind of under this system you undergo you ask yourself, is there any evidence that my belief is true? Well, with regard to my experience, yes, it is true as a general social norm, that people should be, especially a manager of a restaurant, should be courteous. Is there any evidence that my belief is false? It may be true as a social custom, but my belief is not true in the absolute sense, for there is no obligation on her part to be also considerate and friendly to all customers at all times. She may have had a bad day, or my actions somehow may have caused her to, behave in that way. I don't know. So I have to question my belief. What bad things might happen if I keep this belief? I will have more upsetting experiences in the future whenever a person appears friendly, unfriendly. And so, what good things might happen if I let go of this kind of belief? The belief that people need to be friendly to you at all times. Maybe I'm in Japan too long, because over there, they're always friendly and courteous. But whenever I come back to the U.S., I said, "Oh, this is America." You know what I mean? You have all kinds of people, and they don't act, in the same way. So,
Wrong answer.
Huh?
The wrong answer.
Wrong answer?
When you come back here. Come back here.
That may be a relief, though.
Yeah.
I didn't get. Can you say that again?
No, it's just,
Okay. All right, we'll talk later. What good things might happen if I let go of this belief? I will not easily be upset whenever someone appears unfriendly, even a restaurant manager who should be considerate and friendly. So in a way, Buddhism goes, don't expect anything to go your way. Yes?
So getting back to Endo Sensei's question about marriage being suffering, our spouse is an activating agent.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, if you have the belief that from male's perspective, a woman should be this way, that's a belief. And if you have that kind of belief, the sea will be a lot of turmoil.
There's your answer.
So you plant, the bee should be more a Buddhist. This view is much better for your the emotional condition. And then effect is, how have your beliefs, behavior changed because of disputing? And then, so the last page, with a lowered expectation for how others should behave, I feel that I would be less prone to be upset in similar situations and be able to be, quote, kind and gentle to all living beings. As a golden chain state, as in the golden chain. Having said so, I probably would fail most of the time. But I would learn to be more mindful of my actions in keeping with the Buddhist ideals. Well, especially as a Jōdo Shinshu, I have this ideal that we have to have the right kind of belief. Even if you think about it, probably, like here, I probably would fail most of the time. And with regard to in a marriage context, I mean, I try to, have a more appropriate belief, but I find that I fail most of the time. But I think I'm making, 1 inch improvement, but taking 2 steps back or 1 step forward. But either way, I'm hopefully moving in the right direction, and at least I'm aware that I'm having the wrong reaction sometimes, but then hopefully that makes for a more conciliatory relationship and relationship that can work. After all, we lasted 38 years, and so I mean, it's not all her doing. I have something to say too, in that I made contribution. Anyway, I'm not that bad. Maybe. Okay. So.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have 2 words that would help.
Okay.
Yes, dear.
Yeah.
See, you're activating already.
Okay. I will put that down. Believe. We speak Japanese, so. Hi. Hi, わかりました. Yes.
Wonderful and insightful, right? Rational, emotional, behavioral therapy. Does some of this, kind of freshness and newness and common sense seem a bit more strong because we don't necessarily value introspection? We don't necessarily get trained in introspection in our regular world, the world that we usually encounter. It seems like if that's the more introspective people tend to do it quite often, and to them it would be natural. Right? It wouldn't be anything therapeutic.
So what do you suggest for those who are not?
Yeah, it was just a friend of mine, and this is in Winnipeg. She sent me an email about this Ubuntu. You know how every so often a newer belief system comes to the forefront, and it's considered almost like a rediscovery of some mystical path, right? And so I read about it, and I looked at it, and I said, well, yeah, but, I mean, wasn't this just considered common sense? Back, 1930s, 1920s, when we all kind of lived together, we all counted on each other, we all didn't have, fully self-sufficient lives at our momentary, grasp and use, that kind of thing. When we really did have to pull on each other, we had this as a value system.
So that's why the function and the role of a temple is to kind of encourage this kind of self-introspection. And this, it helps to look at why you're feeling such anxiety and anger and whatever. And of course, if you have much deep-seated problems, you can't really do it yourself. But for ordinary people, I think this can be helpful to kind of look at your action and how we are experiencing the events that happen in our lives. And so the B should be more here. So in a Buddhist context, the belief would be like the 4 marks of existence. But most of you seem to know, think big. But there is the opposite. Don't think small. And that is if you think that life should be smooth, or that we're the result of interdependence, but you claim whatever happens to you, especially when things go well, to be mine, And impermanence, you won't always remain the same, especially when things are going your way. And then life is, if you think this way, then life is really lousy. And so don't think big, don't think small. But, and I want to close with this, but one of the things, in keeping with the theme, which is that not to reject the secular dimension, the horizontal dimension, is that when I give this in my class in Japan, most students are very quiet and obedient, and but they don't tell me up front or face to face, but they write in their comment. They feel that this is too passive, is one word maybe. This is, you're not, somehow you're not alive if you always think in this way. And then I thought to myself, yes, well, the Buddhist perspective is to kind of minimize your, GAS and to adapt to others. And that's why Buddhism is regarded as passive. Fundamentally, we try to adapt our thinking to the reality, okay? So I think, and what is good is that this side will minimize suffering, I think. Buddhism, essence of Buddhism is to minimize suffering. That's how that's why Shakyamuni left the world, left the house, to find a solution to dukkha, okay? But as we teach Buddhism in a secularized society, especially to young people, perhaps we can also say, well, you have you can follow this if you want, but it's your decision. If you want to say that you want to succeed in the world, you cannot always be on this side. Sometimes you have to take a chance, say, this is my path, and I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to work hard at it. And so let them follow that. But just let them know that it's your decision, and whatever, by following this side, that there will be greater stress sometimes. You will have to work hard. You may fail, but sometimes, aiming for your dream is good, and do it. And so not to categorically say again that this is right and this is wrong, but Buddhism should be much magnanimous and say this is, it can be, one can go for this, but just know that there's a consequence for it. And ultimately, for spiritual peace of mind, that deepening of this is what Buddhism offers. And the ultimate path in ultimate realization in Buddhist Jōdo Shinshu is called Shinjin, awareness or realization or entrusting. And then ultimately, the Buddhahood is living in full accord with this dimension. Okay, so that, and then the conclusion, I've already talked about the wave in the ocean, and so I won't go over it again, but realizing that I'm a wave, and Ramiyamura and I, our waves are getting smaller, but that's physically speaking. I think mentally we're much larger. Yeah, I think as you get older, hopefully we have more wisdom. But in terms of time, it's definitely, we're getting smaller, and that's the reality. But and this simple analogy has helped me because one of the reasons why I went into Buddhism, in fact the main reason, is how to deal with my fear of death, my personal death. That's what got me started. And if it weren't for this, I wouldn't, I could have done something else. But so it's the monkey on my back for all these years, and now, but I'm very grateful to say that I feel I have overcome that to a great extent. And I won't go into detail of this. Then now we can do it over beer or something. But I think it is important that I you know, I feel confidence much more than, 20, 30 years ago, that what I'm talking about really makes sense, and that it gives the ultimate meaning as to why you were born a human being. Well, let's face it, I keep saying life is tough, and we all have facade of, being in control and etc. But in reality, there's a lot of things going on in our family, in ourselves, and then ultimately, we all have to depart this world. So I think the Buddhist answer is that we have been kind of transmigrating for innumerable kalpas, and finally we're lucky to be born as a human being, and we're lucky to have met the Dharma, and then through the Dharma you come to one real understanding, and which we call shinjin, or awareness, or awakening, and that will make the fact all of this consummate. This is one word. Consummate this life, and to really feel that, oh, life is great. Thank you.